Hey, my name's Paul Higgins, and I am the Irish Connection. This podcast is about connecting with people from all walks of life and finding out their stories, so that they can connect with you all. Positive connections are contagious. Why don't you find out for yourself by listening along weekly? And you can also make more connections through the stories on our blog. Enjoy. So, 1,000 welcomes to another episode of the Irish Connection. We're joined today by Buteyko, breathing method educator and founder of Breathren, Mr. Joel Jelen. Joel, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. So, Buteyko breathing method, I suppose we should really start there and get into it. What exactly is a breathing method educator? I mean, sounds like you're teaching people to breathe, obviously, but do we all not know how to do that already, should we? Or am I completely wrong?
Well, thankfully, you and I are breathing. That's the first thing. But how are we breathing? That's the critical thing. So if you picture the 5 phases as I see it through your day, so sleep, eat, work, exercise, relax, not necessarily in that order, but probably. How you perform at each of those things depends on how you breathe. It's absolutely critical. So, for example, how you eat. If you rush your food and you hyperventilate, you overbreathe, you breathe too quickly, you take a large volume of air, you won't digest your food properly.
Really?
Okay?
Wow.
When you're relaxing, if you're sitting there relaxing, mouth breathing puts you on fight or flight. So if you watch a film, and you like horror films, for example, and you get a buzz out of watching a crazy horror film, okay, that's cool, but bear in mind how you're breathing, especially if you watch it before you go to bed, how you're breathing through that film is not conducive to a sound night's sleep. And you can take it further. So look at sport. So if you are over breathing generally through your daily rhythm, taking too much air, if your breathing is audible, if it's visible, when you perform at sport, you won't have the stamina compared with colleagues who breathe more optimally, i.e. their breathing is silent, like a baby, still, invisible, okay? So you can see, just to that little introduction, the difference it can make. At work, it's a huge thing. So I go into employers, I go into organisations, sometimes charity, sometimes community-based, and I talk with people about how they breathe at their desk, if it's desk-based jobs we're talking about, because how people breathe when they use technology, for whatever reason, becomes completely different compared to how they might breathe if they're just sitting there listening to me like you are now. Yeah. Hopefully a lot of other people are listening to our podcast.
Yeah.
So an example, you can mouth breathe when you're using technology. You can see it in people. People often lean forward. So if that's their legs here and that's their back, they lean forward, they compress their breathing. Or they sit back like that, they compress their breathing. That's why we always go on about that posture. Does that help you to breathe optimally? People breathe from their chest. You see people, they breathe shoulders and chest. You should only ever breathe through your tummy. So through each of those 5 areas of your life daily, you can breathe dysfunctionally. So I mentioned work, usually related to technology, not always. I've mentioned eating. I've mentioned relaxation. I've mentioned exercise. And those 4 things and how you breathe during those 4 activities determine how you sleep. So for some reason, us human beings in the fast-paced Western world have got to the point where we think we can just go to bed at whatever time we go to bed and we can just fall asleep. We can't.
No.
As you and so many of us know, because everyone will know someone, either their partner that they want to kill because they keep them up at night snoring, or friends and family who who have trouble sleeping. So there's a poor sleep epidemic.
Yeah.
In the UK, it's everywhere. It's all over the world. But whenever I read, fascinating to me at least, whenever I read about sleep, I never see from sleep experts or anyone else commenting about the importance of how you breathe during the day and how it determines the quality of your sleep. So one of our key messages is to help people in how they breathe during those functions I listed there before, and also help to sleep better.
It's fascinating, you're right, because all the things that you do see about sleep acne, people have all these things, night terrors, whatever. There's programs done now where they monitor your sleep and sleep sort of apps on and working and seeing how they're going through the phases of sleep and all this. Never once do you ever hear anything about breathing or the breathing of them. Okay, they talk about snoring and stuff like that, or people who have that, but I don't necessarily see it, as you said, attribute it to the actual breathing, and it's certainly not to the breathing throughout those 4 functions of the day that you mentioned. Like, so it is pretty fascinating. Like, so how do we go about obviously educating people more on that? How is that? Has it been dismissed a little bit, or has it been open arms, or is it kind of a mixed sort of bag of people taking on board this?
I think you can be selective about who you choose to flag up in those who have positively received the education we're trying to give to them. So you can always find critics who are just negative. They're negative about lots of stuff. I prefer to look at all those who are taking what we're saying on board, who are open-minded, who know it's a natural remedy, who have seen lots of evidence, and not by breathing educators. I'm not a doctor, but they've seen the evidence from doctors, from surgeons, from people who've been in medicine for 30, 40 years, who recognize its value. And they're probably ahead of the game. They're ahead of the curve, and they're the kind of like-minded people who would take on new information. I can't forget the first thing I was told about this by a chap called Dr. Len McEwen, who I went to see in interview in 1995, who's one of the world's most prominent experts in hyperventilation syndrome or overbreathing syndrome. And he said that doctors, that was back then, and you know what, it hasn't changed right up until the present day. Doctors get half a page dedicated to the Bohr effect, B-O-H-R, Bohr effect, all about breathing in their textbooks. That's it. So I'm friends with a couple of guys who are doctors, one who's a GP. They're very open to it. I regularly, within my social media channels, get approaches from people who are highly qualified in medicine, who come to me, who are fascinated by it, who want help, for people who have come to them who are a strain on the NHS, not of their own fault, but they're going to the NHS and they've got fat files. In other words, files that high with loads of negative results because GPs and other doctors couldn't help them. Yet they've been treated by the likes of us, breathing educators, and they've been cured. Or they've been able to manage their condition, because sometimes it does cross over with other conditions.
Yeah.
But you can greatly reduce conditions and greatly improve your own health through breathing correctly, because how you breathe is the foundation of good health.
Yeah. It seems quite, what do you call it, like when you say it like that, like, well, of course, like, common sense, but you don't think about it like that, do you? You think you need water, you need food, you need, shelter. You think of all these other things that are actually, but the fundamental thing that we're first listening for when a child is born is that breathing, isn't it? That noise or whatever, the scream or whatever that they talk about, that, everything's all right. So, of course, it's breathing's the fundamental thing, but it's not, I don't know, maybe it's, as you say, maybe it's a miseducation, or as time goes on, you take it for granted or whatever, or you just think you should be doing it right, and you're maybe not.
Yeah, it's a lack of appreciation. It's one way of putting it. But us humans, when we have a problem, we deal with it. We don't necessarily look at prevention. It's not necessarily in our medical culture to behave like that. Yeah. So there are a number of telltale signs at birth, for example, which we need to look at. When I say we, I mean people within medicine, that often gets overlooked, and that's still the case in 2021. So in a previous conversation with me that we talked about tongue ties.
Yeah.
So tongue ties where you have a small amount of fascia or a piece of skin that dangles from the tongue but is connected to the base of the mouth. If you have that undetected, you'll have it until you're treated. You have it as a teenager, you won't grow out of it, you'll have it as an adult, and at some point it will bite you back. What it will start to do from an early age is narrow your airways. So the tongue must sit on the palate. Here's the palate, here's the tongue. The tip of the tongue touches the back of the teeth, okay, at the top. Mm-hmm. Got to sit there. If it doesn't, you narrow the airways to the back of the mouth. So people get lots of respiratory conditions as a result of having a tongue tie until it gets noticed. So many people, as in nurses, doctors, etc., don't notice or even look for a tongue tie at birth, which is crazy. It's such a simple thing, and it takes literally a 10-minute procedure by laser to remove it. Remove it at birth and save young people sometimes a lifetime of misery.
Yeah.
So you can see right from day off, right from the start, the first day, there's a lack of appreciation around breathing education, which is partly why I'm involved in this.
And what sort, you mentioned about some of the things that it may be able to help, some of the conditions. What sort of conditions could it really help out there? Like, I mean, have you seen success with some of them that you mentioned? What sort of things could it help?
There are typical conditions that we can help, but it's worth bearing in mind that if you have hyperventilation or overbreathing syndrome, or you just have a breathing dysfunction, potentially you could experience one of 150 different conditions.
Wow.
That's what physicians are currently saying. Wow. Based on the overbreathing phenomenon. And it's a hidden epidemic, that's what they're calling it. So the most common conditions are asthma, COPD, anxiety, depression, myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue, mm-hmm. and chronic hyperventilation syndrome. They're the typical scenarios. But the biggest problem is that how do you educate somebody about something they didn't know they had?
Yeah. I mean, those conditions you mentioned, like, I mean, I don't have stats or anything on it, but I'd imagine that that's a large percentage of the population there that covers those 4 or 5 conditions, and you said there's 150. So, I mean, there's a massive amount of people out there, and as you said, who have those conditions and are suffering incredibly, either mental health or with the asthma and COPD and things like that, and the stress that brings on it. But not only that, as you mentioned right at the top of the conversation, the cost of that on the NHS. It's mind-boggling to believe that there could be such a simple answer to things, and often the simple answer is always the easiest and the best, but it's always overlooked.
Yeah, it's true. There'll be some opposition amongst some of the pharmaceuticals. There's been some trials that go back to 98, a program on BBC One, QED, which trialled around a dozen patients who suffered with asthma. The first trials were so successful that BBC decided to run a second set of trials, and the pharmaceutical company who supported the program pulled out the second trial because they were so successful, all the patients in the treatment, which reduced their asthma symptoms by up to 70%. Wow. This was over a period of 2 weeks. So you can see there's a fear there by people who are producing a product where what we're offering is natural techniques to help people completely change their life, basically.
Well, that doesn't surprise me, actually. There's always been that.
Business is business.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But
the other interesting thing about conditions that you asked about it's worth noting that from some of those conditions, other conditions then come to the fore.
Yes.
So people who suffer with asthma can suffer with hay fever, which is rhinitis basically, and they can also suffer from food allergy and intolerance as well.
Yeah.
So there's a cumulative effect, and you create multiplier scenarios, other conditions where you haven't got your breathing under control.
And see, that's, wow, it's unbelievable, isn't it? You're right, because they do go really hand in hand. And again, not even just thinking to a kid who I know is a friend of my son's, like, he's just what you said there, asthmatic, but then also has those other little conditions, bad eczema when he was growing up, the allergies and the food allergies and everything, so it's, wow. And no one's putting two and two together, as you say, and getting forward here.
It's a simple chain reaction, unfortunately. I did a workshop for Public Health England on Friday last week.
Yeah.
Slowly, there's more realization that prolonged stress as well changes your breathing rate. So we live as a society, generalizing, much more now in what we call the sympathetic. So there's two types of time related to your nervous system. So you've got an autonomic nervous system that functions automatically, as it sounds. Around 50-50 is the ratio of time you should live in parasympathetic versus sympathetic. To explain a bit more, when you're in the parasympathetic, you're chilling out, you're in control, you're relaxed, you've got a care in the world, it's your time. When you're in sympathetic, you're on this almost heightened sense of anticipation, where you're having to react and respond to loads of things around you. And for whatever reason, there are a variety, human beings have become locked in that sympathetic nervous system state. So I often ask people when I go to a business, I say, this is before the pandemic, when we could do face-to-face, I say, how about everyone who can remember the last time they did absolutely nothing? Nobody ever volunteers with their hand because they can't remember. So even if somebody just works 9-5, for whatever reason, partly to do with these things, on Facebook at 11 o'clock at night talking to their friends, or they're doing whatever they're doing, but they just have lost the ability to sit still. It's not easy to sit still and be silent, which has been found out by a lot of people in the pandemic. Because there are a lot of people out there who are very, very unhappy. And I don't sit here in any smug way thinking just because I can do it and no one else can, I feel happy about it. Far from it. I would love to encourage and be able to motivate as many people as possible to be able to learn to sit down, just relax, not be thinking about anything, and enjoy still peace and quiet, because it's huge for your immunity and your overall health. Problem is, so many people use distractions instead of doing that. They do have the opportunity, not everyone, busy mums, busy dads, difficult, especially with homeschooling, nightmare. But before all this, people would use distractions like going shopping, just doing anything to not sit still. And it's an art that you can do by focusing on the breath. And when you focus on the breath, it's a great way of cultivating mindfulness and appreciating what you've got, as in your own health, and that maybe you don't need to rush around. Maybe you should put yourself a bit more first and appreciate other things in life, like nature and going for a gentle walk rather than trying to peg it around the park in an Olympian time. You know? So there's too many alpha males and too many alpha females trying to smash life. There's a better way, and you know, our brains work slowly. They're meant to work slowly. No pun intended at all there. Our hearts are supposed to work slowly, apart from when we need to give them a good workout. But the more we're in that higher gear, in fifth gear, pummeling our brain with info and thinking too much, and the more we're running around like crazy, pushing our heart, we're not on the right road in terms of health. And if you think how your breath is when your head's going crazy with loads of facts, thinking about stuff, for example, 90% of which will never happen.
Yeah.
When you're running around and you're just tired, your body just wants a break. So I have a few friends who are teachers. Every December, they used to get ill.
Yeah.
Because they were on that heightened sense of anticipation, operating in the sympathetic. It doesn't work. So through the breath, slow your life down. It doesn't mean being some hippie. I mentioned this last time when we spoke. It's not about being chilled out. It's about using your breath to become efficient.
Yeah.
So when you're at work, you're productive. When you're relaxing, you're chilled. When you do sport, you bang on it. You can be as competitive as you want, and so on and so on. When you sleep sound because you know how to breathe during the day.
It is really fascinating. Like, it absolutely is. I mean, just that little snippet there you were talking about, like, we are living in a world now, and I can see it in the kids. They are so wired in, like 24/7 now, like to whatever, social media, all these types of things, and videos and everything, and school are wired in, video games are wired in. They are just constantly, everything's there's no patience anymore. Everything's on demand now. Record, I order it now, it comes tomorrow from Amazon. It's, everything is heightened and fast forward, and everything's high paced. You're right. Like, it's but I think people are afraid, Joel, sometimes to slow down and stop, and afraid of what they might think, and afraid of what their thoughts will tell them, or what their body's or listen to their body. That's a fear thing, to really stop, as you say, and go, right, for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just completely stop, and you say concentrate on the breathing. Lots of people don't want to do that. Like, there is a fear that you might be told something they don't want to hear, or whatever, or a guilt that they should be doing something else. But as you said, if you don't self-love, or you don't look after yourself, how can you then look after all the other parts of your life, whether it be your job, your kids, your family, your parents, whatever? How can you sort of be efficient and productive if you're not being more inside efficient and productive with yourself, and truthful maybe with yourself? So it's fascinating. Like, there's obviously the pandemic's brought out probably a lot of things around people, and there's a lot of mental health issues, and things have sort of come to the forefront maybe, and people have not been able to do as much. But that doesn't mean, as you said, they've actually stopped and not done anything. They've found those distractions, shopping online, or homeschooling, or working from home. And this whole working from home environment, it's not really working from home when you're trying to homeschool and everything. It's near on impossible, like, because you're working at 10, 11 at night because you've been trying to help the kids all day and all, and catch up. And it's really tipped the balances, hasn't it, for people? It's frightening to think where it could go. I don't know, but I think really people should really look into this and, open up to it a little bit, like, and hopefully we can educate a little bit on it. You know what? I'm really interested to find some more, So how do you, when you're sort of going to these companies, where's your first sort of point of call? What do you say? Do you tell them about the history of it? Do you teach them about that? Or is it straight into some sort of more practical stuff?
Well, I do the prep beforehand because I ask them what their needs are. So there are some companies I work with at the sharp end in the private sector. They're a bit like some of the athletes I work with. They're very competitive. They want to succeed. And so you need to talk their language and think about how they behave as people, and then tell them how they can maximize their performance, for the better phrase.
Yeah.
And you look at how they currently do what they do and where the opportunities are to improve to get to that maximum level. So, for example, with an athlete might be mouth breathing all the time whilst they train. If you train them in how they can nose breathe through their training, they will increase their performance. Because without getting into too much of the science, When you nose breathe, you blow oxygen, CO2, and nitric oxide up your nostrils. They are all energy drivers, as opposed to mouth breathing, where you just blow out CO2 all the time and you're losing energy. Right. So there are people at, for example, Olympic level who have gone on to win gold medals because they learned how to nose breathe when they performed at sport and during their training. Some of the people I work with are stressed out execs who don't realize about the value of the parasympathetic versus the sympathetic.
Yeah.
They may become overwhelmed by the stress of the position. They may not have taken enough time to just sit there and do nothing, like I described earlier. The beauty of sitting there and doing nothing is usually borne out by holidays. And the amount of people who go on that beach holiday that we used to go on when we were allowed, and you come back 2 weeks later and you have a flood of ideas. Yeah. It's because you lived in the parasympathetic for 2 weeks. Even if the kids were driving you mad on the beach and playing with crocodiles, it doesn't matter, right? You still had some time to yourself and you were still chilling out, as long as you were leaving your emails and your phone alone.
Yeah.
Okay? Staying away from anything that creates this anticipation. So basically, when you use things like this, when you use technology, when you put yourself on that anticipation level, your heart rate goes up.
Yeah.
By 4 or 5 seconds, sometimes more. You times that by the number of minutes there are in a day. You don't want to do that. So the point is, treating stressed out execs, what they want to hear is, how can I be more productive at work, have more energy, not be stressed, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes their issue is fear. And at the root of all emotion is fear. We know that from mindfulness practitioners for centuries. So it's about removing the fear, and you can partly do that by focusing on the breath. It might sound crazy, but a lot of breath work, it really is about the experience. When you experience, for example, breathing silently, breathing through your stomach rather than your chest, breathing at night gently through your nose, how you feel as a result of doing that is all in the experience. It really is. And so the people that I've helped, like the CEOs, they completely get it because they've seen the change. Because they react from a different space in their body and in their head when they face the stress. So it could be like you're a stressed out exec. Your office is near a beach, if only, in the Bahamas, if only.
Yeah.
You step on the beach, I walk up behind you, I tap you on the shoulder. That's what you do. As opposed to, you're an exec who's in control. You know your breathing techniques, you know your mindfulness, you know your stuff. You do the parasympathetic thing as well, okay? You leave the office, you go to the beach, I tap you on the shoulder, you do this. So if you are coming from a lower base of stress because you've got the techniques designed to bring your stress down, no matter what the situation, you respond better.
Yeah.
So how can you arm yourself in an office or as a mum or as an athlete to respond better to stressful situations? Well, it's all in how you breathe.
Wow. It's fascinating. Really is. Not many people, I think, would, you don't hear many people really go into that, do they? Especially over the ages, stressed out mums or athletes and that. What was the enhancers? What do we need to? They looked at science, they looked at results, but no one's really actually, until recently, with people like yourselves who educate people to actually look at the breathing. There's more than the monitor on the sportsman's back or sportswoman's back or the athlete's back that's showing their results in a graph. You can affect that by just using the breathing techniques. So it really is. It's a fascinating subject. So how did you get involved in it? Where did that come from, or where did the passion for it come from? Did you always do this?
So I was fascinated like you, and thank you for all your compliments so far. So I met a doctor in 95 because I was a freelance journalist, and I was really, really curious as to why I was getting so nervous using this mixing desk as part of my broadcast media training. And I was doing, as I call it, Darth Vader breathing from the chest, audible, visible. Yeah. And I was thinking, I'm not a particularly anxious guy. I don't worry about too much. So what's the score here? So I found out that I just had this over breathing habit for whatever reason. Fear, really, wanting to do really well. Yeah. Developed an over breathing habit every time I stepped into that studio because I identified it as a trigger. Right. So I thought, well, I need to do two things here. One, learn how to use the bloody thing. And two, find out why it's a trigger. So as part of my work, my paid work, I went to see a doctor, Dr. Len McEwen, and I learned about how overbreathing is this hidden epidemic, as he described it. And he said that 25, 30 years, he was so ahead of his time, this guy, this would become prominent as a problem. And doctors at a GP level and higher would start to associate this as a foundation of so many illnesses that are out there, particularly respiratory. So I thought, right, I'm going to get stuck into this. And I committed to what he told me. So he gave me the education bit, and then he told me about some of the techniques. Got stuck into them, found they were amazing. Yeah. And I wanted to find out how they could be adapted. Then studied yoga, studied mindfulness, studied meditation. I found that in some yoga practices, they were employing some of these techniques, but only 50-50, as in they were breathing in through the nose, but they were breathing out through the mouth. I'd found out from Dr. Len McEwen and then subsequently other practitioners, a guy called Patrick McEwen, who's probably one of the best known within the Buteyko method, that mouth breathing creates fight or flight. You put yourself in stress mode when you do it. So I thought, well, how can we encourage more people in areas that are already becoming quite popular, like yoga, meditation, mindfulness, people just to nose breathe. So I thought I need to go headstrong into this, maybe become part of a global movement, get involved in forums, etc., etc. Yeah. You know, why do we become interested in things? Well, we find things that we need. Yeah. Sometimes what we need finds us as well. Yeah, very much so. It just became a passion. And maybe I'm one of these guys who just wants to help other people genuinely. And I really enjoy the science of it. And there's a great message out there. So I decided that as soon as it was commercially viable to do so, I put together a company, which was 3.5 to 4 years ago now, put a company together and dedicate a business to the art of helping people in community groups, organizations, within the corporate world, athletes and the general public. And it's a slow burn, but the pandemic hasn't done any harm, without sounding selfish, to the world of breathing education, because of course, hearing so many people suffering, you know, not being able to breathe properly, it's been right up there on so many people's agendas. So less people are thinking that what I'm doing is some kind of crazy, cranky, wacky pursuit, and are treating it far more seriously. And it's really about dedication. And once people see you serious, and on a daily basis trying to educate people, they look in and they start to relate. And unfortunately, there's more people suffering from anxiety. Mm-hmm. They only seem to get help with tablets and maybe some counseling. Yeah. But looking at how they breathe can be the foundation of getting rid of anxiety. So the messages are getting there. It will carry on being a slow burn, but I'm in it now. I'm in it for good. So see what happens. Awesome. I know it's going to do well. Passion like that behind it, and that when you've got passion for things, don't you? You know, it can't only but be successful, because people will see that passion, and if you attract like-minded people, as you said, and you attract
passionate people when you put it out there, and like-minded people who are passionate about similar things, and hopefully they find each other, as you said, or it finds them, and it'll start that movement, that domino effect, hopefully. And as you touched on the pandemic, like, that frightening, it's really, really, I think it's a fear for a lot of people, and I know fear is the root of a lot of things, but that drowning or not being able to breathe, or that's a really scary thing for people. And I think it's maybe now brought it to the forefront of people's minds to think, actually, it can strike anyone. And that, I mean, with the whole COVID and long COVID and things like that, those techniques that you spoke about that Dr. Hewan had given you way back then, do you have to practice them every day, Joel, or is that something that you keep going with? Or once you've kind of mastered, does it reset the bad habits that you had, and now you kind of can do it without having to practice those? Or are they something you've really got to do for life?
Okay, well, great question. I'll give you an example of a technique.
Yeah.
We're coming to the end of the podcast shortly. So this particular technique, anyone can do it. Some of the techniques that we employ, if you have high blood pressure, for example, or some kind of compromised immunity or condition, we couldn't give you those techniques. But this particular one, anyone can do it. It's probably the best one to demonstrate on this podcast. So you simply breathe in and breathe out through the nose only, a gentle breath. I can see your shoulders move there. So make sure it's from so let me just say to you that if you put your left hand on your chest, your right hand on your stomach, as you take a breath in through the nose only, you should feel your right hand move outwards slightly. You shouldn't feel any movement in your left hand. Okay. So once you've taken that out breath, so pinch your nose, hold it for 5 seconds, mouth closed. Then let go, mouth closed, and just relax. Nice gentle breath in and out through the nose. Just relax for 10 seconds. And you repeat that after 10 seconds. Again, small breath in, small breath out through the nose, pinch your nose, hold for 5, and so on and so forth. So you can do that up to 6 times. It's called many small breath holds, and it will kill any panic attack. It will bring down your breathing rate. Because if you think about it, over a minute, if you're doing it 6 times, you've spent 30 seconds where you're not breathing. The point being is, we all need to breathe less. The less air you take, and the less breaths you take, the less volume you take, the more oxygen, CO2, and nitric oxide you drive into your system. People think generally about oxygen. If you want to think about that, just think about that. You generate more oxygen the less you breathe. That's critical in all of this. So we're asking people, encouraging people to learn techniques like that. They breathe less. The less you breathe, the more relaxed you are. The more you breathe, the more stressed you are. That's science.
So when you think of those panic attacks, or you've ever seen anyone, the onset of an asthma attack, the breathing starts to become rapid, doesn't it? You know what I mean? But like you say, if you can control that, wow, great technique. So that's something you can just practice. And you're best practicing that in a state of, as you said, calmness. So that 5 minutes right at the beginning we were speaking about, take 5 or 10 minutes, practice this technique, and that's going to help just to start to maybe that breathing down, Yeah,
the best time to employ any wellness techniques is when you're really well. But try to tell the majority of the population that.
Well, most of us aren't well ever, are we? So
listen, everybody, Paul, is walking around with symptoms. One degree or another. Take that for granted.
What would I do?
That's, it's degrees of wellness, isn't it? But what I'm saying is, if we can have a mindset where we think about, I'm really well today, I'm going to do my techniques. So you asked me, to finish off, you asked me that question about when do you do them, how often do you do them, how long do you do them for? So the answer to that is simple. when you experience the techniques and some of the lifestyle habits, strategies around it, it's not just about breathing techniques, by the way.
Yeah.
It definitely isn't. You experience what you experience and you value it so much that you won't stop.
Yeah.
You'll become like, the habits that you have when you get up in the morning, you wash your hands, your face, you go for a pee, you do your things, you'll use the mindfulness. So they're with you for life if you want them, because the benefits they have for your health and the foundation of your health are huge. So it's your choice. Yes, the breathing center resets over a period of time, and it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
But once it resets, why not just keep recharging it every so often by just doing a little bit each day? It's nothing out of your day. We're talking 20 minutes, 30 minutes maximum.
Yeah.
Think how many minutes you have every day.
That's it. If we make more time for that, we're going to be hopefully more, as you said, productive in the other things that we're trying to do, and therefore we feel maybe in our mind that we've achieved more. So amazing, absolutely fascinating, Joe. Really, mate, we could, as you say, we could talk all day on the things and the techniques and all the different sort of backgrounds and things. But I think obviously we will look to maybe bring you back, I think, and maybe look to see. I'm going to try and employ some of those techniques that we talked about, definitely, and see where we go from there. But you know what? Really good luck with everything. I hope the message starts to get out there a bit more. And I know with yourself behind it and the passion behind it, it will be successful. But thanks a million for coming on and giving us a little bit of education today around our breathing techniques. And
thank you, and thanks for asking me. And by the way, a little tip on mouth breathing. So breathe as often through your mouth as you eat through your nose.
I remember that one. I'm going to tell the kids that one. They'll look at me like, absolutely fantastic. Joe, my man, it's been amazing. Thank you so much. Fascinating stuff. We will catch up again soon, yeah?
Thanks for the opportunity, Paul. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Take care, bud.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.